Return to Castle Wolfenstein is 20 years old at the time of this video's release, and in my eyes holds its place as the end of an era for classic FPS games. While the game has aged well, and in many ways feels closer to FPS titles of today, I still see it as the midpoint between what's considered retro and modern. Almost everyone has had their say on Return to Castle Wolfenstein by this point, and I doubt anyone's going to have their minds changed on the game as a whole, so I thought I'd look at each level individually, rather than as a collective. As I go through each level in the game, from start to finish, I'll add it to the ranking wall, positioned from number 1 being the best in the game, to number 26 being the worst in the game. Some of these levels are really tough to split, so take the numbers with a grain of salt. Escape. Not bad for the first level, especially since the player is expected to be learning the ropes. There are a few dead-end rooms, but not enough to make you feel like you're trying to escape a proper dungeon like the notebook says, at least on the PC version of the game. The console versions remedied that by adding a larger dungeon section as its own separate level. Your arsenal is limited to 3 guns, the Luger, which you'll use for killing 4 soldiers tops, the MP40 and the Mauser rifle. The MP40 will be useful for the majority of the game and easily dispatches the most basic fodder enemies. I will say that the scripted event where the enemies shoot through the floorboards is a nice touch, and I appreciate the reimagining of the first area of Wolfenstein 3D on the Quake 3 engine. I've placed Escape at 13. It's a decent introductory level, they couldn't do too much with it without confusing new players, and it does the job. Next up is Castle Keep, a more action-packed version of Escape that came before it. More enemies, more shooting, more backtracking, and an introduction to the stationary MG42s that you'll find within many levels throughout the game. This thing still feels so powerful and oomphy, even 20 years later. This level's primary purpose is to make sure you know how to use the MP40 and the Mauser rifle. The Castle Keep itself is fun to explore and looks the part. I love how this game makes you feel like you're navigating real places that could be lived in. Gameplay wise, it's just the standard soldiers throughout, and by the end of it, you're ready for something slightly different. I'm going to position Castle Keep at number 12. It's slightly better than Escape, just has a few more enemies, a bit more action, but it's nothing special. Level 3 is Tram Ride. Well, it's almost something different. Tram Ride is a nice spectacle and slightly slower paced, though the enemy variety and weapons remain the same. The player being in control of the cable tram and the ability to take fights while being its passenger is a highlight. I also like being able to throw a grenade down into this room to take out this sitting duck. It's a short but sweet level. They go easy on introducing enemy types in the opening levels, but thematically it makes sense. They weren't ready for you to escape, nor be of any particular threat yet. Continuing the boring theme, I'm going to place Tram 1 position above Castle Keep at 11. It's once again a fine level, slightly more interesting than the previous, but nothing special. Village. This level feels like a slight step up thanks to the multiple paths that you and enemies can take at certain points. It really feels like we're escaping that linearity of the first 3 levels. The village aesthetic is still quite visually appealing. The indoor environments are incredibly cozy. You can even go inside someone's home and drink their beer. By contrast, the outdoor streets can spring a few surprises and definitely serve as a skill check before we get into the real tough parts of the game. I'm a big fan of this MG42 placement and the soldiers which come running straight towards you right on cue. We'll see our first unarmed German NPCs of the game, which also aids the immersion greatly. You also get the Sten gun, a staple for the rest of the game for those looking to keep quiet, and if you look hard enough, the dynamite. You want to hope you haven't found this level too tough, as there's a big difficulty spike coming up. I've placed Village at number 9. It's somewhat non-linear, and the recreation of the village is still very easy on the eyes even 20 years later. Catacombs, the first and better of the 2 undead levels in my opinion. The intro sequence does a great job at creeping out the player and showing the fear of the trapped Nazis. I always enjoy letting the undead fight the soldiers in the room below, choosing which side wins out. Almost always the undead, but only just, so I don't have to waste as much ammo. You'll see and hear various soldiers throughout the level, usually struggling to defend themselves. It really adds to the immersion of the undead being an unknown force to all involved. The beige toned walls are a welcome change from the grey and snow you've been accustomed to. There are just the right number of undead without them becoming tiresome to deal with. The sword and shield variant can only be damaged when walking towards you. This gimmick gets old pretty quick, but I love their visual design. The Catacombs is an atmospheric and sudden shake-up that ends with a fire undead awakening from flames. This guy will kill you if you don't realise just how many bullets or grenades you have to throw at him. Catacombs comes in at number 7 due to its ability to shake up the campaign and add a new dimension to both the enemy roster and level diversity. Crypt, the second of the undead levels, but not as good as the first one. It's not bad, but I think it suffers from following the Catacombs and hitting most of the same notes, minus the element of surprise. This level brings back the fire undead from the end of the previous level. If you're patient, you can usually let the soldiers ahead of you do some of the work in bringing them down, before dying in fiery agony. The area with the mist and undead that simultaneously break out of the ground stands out, as well as the earthquake that causes ancient statues to breathe fire and the entrance to the defiled church to be revealed. There's also a trio of traps near the end, which is really basic nowadays, but so much of this game requires you to hold mouse 1 up until this point that it serves as a reasonably welcome breather. Number 17 for the Crypt. It's not bad, it tries some things, but it could be a bit of a drag. Defiled Church. Visually, the church is quite easy on the eye. It's suitably gloomy by the game standards, but there's still some nice windows and architecture. The gameplay though is tiresome. There are a lot of elite guards. Fighting so many of them in close quarters is a fun challenge at first, but they outstay their welcome. There are good moments though. The layouts of some of the open spaces lend themselves really well to the elite guards' rolling and lateral movement patterns. I guess that's why they spam them all over the map to hope that the player notices the developers' hard work. Strafing and rolling enemies were impressive back in the day, but enemy AI really picked up over the next few years with the likes of Half-Life 2 and Call of Duty, so it's hard to appreciate it looking back. Defiled Church comes in at number 19. It visually holds up fantastically, but that doesn't make up for the occasionally frustrating and repetitive elite guard shootouts. Next up we have Tomb, the first boss of the game and a fight that's extremely easy to cheese. You start off in a bunker with health and ammo supplies that you can keep coming back to for safety. I can only assume they were playing it safe here with the first boss. Ulrich is basically just a humongous undead with lots of health who can run towards you if he chooses to. The surrounding undead mean you can't focus all of your attention on Ulrich, but with the bunker there's an easy out available at all times, which really reduces the tension. It's a boring fight and a really underwhelming boss. I've put Tomb at number 24. Honestly, the cinematics are the best part about this level. Next up is Forest Compound. This level tends to be a bit of a love it or hate it level. I used to think it was difficult but clever, but since playing games with more developed stealth like Thief and Thief 2, this one's nowhere near as impressive to me. It's hard to tell if an enemy will hear you silently take out his colleague or remain oblivious. Sometimes they'll even hear you jogging on the grass while music is playing inside. Then there's the eagle-eyed soldiers positioned at various guard posts who really like looking at exactly which direction you intend to approach them from, just when you decide to go in. Here's hoping you find the snooper rifle before you sneak into the back of the truck undetected, and not after. Despite what I've just said, I'm putting Forest Compound at 10 purely for its ambition, but not for its execution. Next up is Rocket Base. A fun and fast-paced romp after the last 4 levels or so. It really feels like you've arrived in the nick of time with no one suspecting you as you climb out of the back of the truck from the previous level. Rocket Base is one of those levels that I'd boot up again and again when I was younger. It's just easy fun taking out each guard in a few shots while barely stopping all the way to the end. Hearing the announcements of the impending rocket launch and taking out each unsuspecting soldier and scientist never gets old. It gets a bit tougher once you sabotage the launch, but I wouldn't call this level difficult at all. The collapsing bridges as you're making your way out of the base are a nice touch. I'm putting Rocket Base at number 3. I could barely say anything bad about this level, but it's just not quite as ambitious as 1 or 2, which we'll get to later. Next we have radar installation. Another solid level. You get to man machine guns and destroy a radar tower, with dynamite if you found it. I like how as soon as you jump on this MG42 here, a group of soldiers will start running out directly into your line of fire. There's a soldier with a rocket launcher who tries his luck to splatter you from range if you run out into view. His colleague also likes to ignore the machine gun standing right in front of him and instead opts for his MP40, not the brightest guy. What's left is basic room-to-room shooting of the standard grunts, blowing up the radar installation, and finding your way to the end. That's not necessarily a bad thing. This level represents what I think is Return to Castle Wolfenstein's bread and butter, steady pace and solid action. I've put radar installation number 5. It's not quite as frantic and exciting as Rocket Base is, but it's pretty close. Airbase Assault. Probably one of the best openings of any level in the game. A plane lifts off in real time as you make your way out of a tunnel, giving you that impression that you were just too late. I'm not a fan of the large open tarmac space at the beginning. Running across large open spaces just doesn't do the game any favours. The enemies really struggle to be much of a threat at long range as well, and here it just makes the fighting into a danger-free shooting gallery. It's a shame they couldn't make this setting work better from a level design perspective. What saves this level though is the introduction of the paratrooper soldiers, who float down as a squad to ambush you from the sky. It's easy to give in to the fantasy that these guys are being held back just for BJ, as he's caused a fair bit of trouble by this point. Almost a good level. I've put Airbase Assault at number 14. It does some things right, and the introduction of the paratroopers is memorable, but not much else. We go to Kugelstadt as we approach the midway point of the game. I really enjoyed what they were going for here. It's certainly something different. First you help guide a friendly tank through a war-torn town that's crawling with soldiers. Then you're called in to rescue allies from a sticky spot before the tank pays you back and creates a way out of the level. For those that like to quick save often, there's a couple of soldiers waiting to ambush the tank that can cause trouble to your save if you thought the coast was clear. They pop out once the tank is in position to blow up the door for you and can quickly take out the tank and fail the mission. Overall, the designers captured the setting really well here, and the enemies are suitably reskinned for the next couple of levels to match. Bonus marks for equipping the player with dual Colt 45s and sufficient ammunition for these things for once. I've put Kugelstadt at number 6. It just has a little bit too much downtime to stop it from being one of the best levels in the game, but I really like what they've done here. The Bombed Factory. Not a bad level at all. There's a good mix of enemies and some varied setups, including soldiers manning MG42s and giving the player the ability to sneak up on enemies from behind via a sewer tunnel. I appreciate the effort that was put in to make the factory buildings look like they'd really been bombed. It's a bit odd that you find the all-important Venom journal just lying on a table in a random building near the end of the level. You just happen to come across it on your way out rather than actively searching for it. It's a missed opportunity to not include a more standout location to retrieve the book from, but I still enjoy this level overall. Special mention to this guy who fails hilariously to defuse a bomb.
So how do I disarm this thing?
I've put the Bomb Factory at number 16. It feels like a bit of a budget Kugelstadt and is just kind of there to space out the game. Next we have Trainyard. You see the best of this level in the opening setup. A soldier will try to take you out with a Panzerfaust. You see a train, there are enemies crawling everywhere. This should be fun. Shame the rest of the level's all inside a dull grey building. This is the start of some really tedious paratrooper fights that become commonplace in the second half of the game. Thankfully, most other levels from here on out at least mix up the enemy types and level appearance. This may seem harsh, but I've put Trainyard at number 26, the worst level in Return to Castle Wolfenstein. I just don't like anything about this level. Next we have Secret Weapons Facility. This has a similar aesthetic to the Trainyard before it, except we get introduced to the Venom Gun and the Loper. The set piece that introduces the Loper is fun to spectate, and trying out the Venom Gun comfortably puts this level above the Trainyard. I didn't mind the early fight in what I assume is a shipping room. At least they tried to spice the combat up with a multi-story firefight and boxes for cover. Eventually you'll find an empty submarine bay, which I don't appreciate as far as the gameplay goes. It's more of that FG42 hide and peek shooting that becomes more and more prevalent with the increasing number of paratroopers. I've put Secret Weapons Facility at number 25. It's definitely better than Trainyard, but I really couldn't put it above anything else. Ice Station Norway. Bit of a mixed bag here, to be honest. As with all the outdoor environments in the game, they haven't aged amazingly, but it's certainly less rough around the edges than Forest Compound. There are some fun moments where you can take out enemies by surprise through the fog, and even if they do survive, they'll probably fail hopelessly to land a bullet on you. If it weren't for a couple of fights that can result in bottlenecks in doorways or on ladders, this one might have been higher on the list. As with most large open levels in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, the shooting itself can become monotonous, and it shouldn't be a surprise to see several enemies all jogging straight towards you from far away, thanks to their pathing behaviour. I've placed Ice Station at number 20. Ice Station is just okay. Next we have the X-Labs. The X-Labs combines all the best elements of Return to Castle Wolfenstein into one very difficult level. The X-Labs is a research facility filled with experiments being developed to turn the tide of the war. When you begin the level, you know straight away that this place is the cutting edge and probably home to some technology you haven't even seen yet. You've seen the Loper before, and good thing too, because this one breaks out of containment and there are many others scattered throughout the level. Your Venom Gun is going to get a workout, but the enemies are there to match. There are several proto-soldiers, some wielding Venom Guns and some Panzerfausts. They can hit you hard if you leave yourself out in the open, but get them stuck behind some cover and you can cheese them by shooting them in the hip. There's a set piece when you find the main research lab where Lopers take out every scientist in the room, which really tells you how out of control these experiments are. The last bit of praise I have for this level are the underwater tunnels that link parts of the level together. They bring together that feeling of the facility being a real, non-linear place that you just happen to be fighting baddies in. Terrific level.
No, don't kill me!
I've put the X-Labs at number 1. It's challenging, but it's not unfair. It looks great, and it has the best set pieces in the entire game. Next we have Super Soldier, the second boss of the game. I'm really split on this one. It's the only boss level that poses any real challenge, but the way it does this is very questionable. Before you get to the main arena, there are a few proto-soldiers guarding tight corridors. It's really just a brief linear continuation of the X-Labs. Once you've arrived to face the Super Soldier, Deathshead gives you a brief introduction to his greatest creation, and you're off to most likely hide for cover from his Tesla gun attack. This thing is impossible to dodge. You just have to have enough HP to sustain it while dealing greater damage back. If you have enough health to start with, you can simply rely on the Venom Gun to win in a firepower contest, but if you're low HP, get ready for tedious corner peeking. There's also a Panzerfaust attack, but it's unlikely to cause much trouble, assuming you've found cover to rotate around. Challenging but not fun is how I describe this fight. Once it's over, you do get to use your new Tesla gun on the scientists if you wish. Thanks, devs. I've put Super Soldier at number 18. The boss fight is slightly unfair and not very interesting, but at least there's a challenge unlike Ulrich. Next up we have Bramburg Dam. My favourite part of this level is the intro cutscene.
But what am I supposed to do with all this cheese? I don't know, look for some crackers?
The dam itself is fine, you start undetected and can remain so for the entirety of the level if you're good enough, which I'm not. Most players will find themselves faced with an onslaught of enemies once they reach the top of the elevator, but there's always the option to drop back and let the enemies come to you. There's also an oddly placed MG42, which I feel is in a position where it's not quite as useful as it should be. Other than that, not much else of note here. I've put Bramburg Dam at number 15, just an unremarkable level that doesn't really do anything wrong, but doesn't do anything amazing either. Paderborn Village, the second stealth mission of the game, and thankfully it benefits from its lessened ambition. The abundance of small houses and tight streets lends itself nicely to discreet use of the Sten gun and sneaking up on each key officer that needs to be taken out in order to exit the level. Snooping your way around people's homes and intruding on clearly private affairs really sells the stealth requirement convincingly. Visually, the level does a great service to the Quake 3 engine's strengths. It just looks fantastic. It's possible to get slightly lost despite the relatively small size of the village, thanks to the samey appearance of the houses, but there are plenty of secrets to compensate, including one very early on that's probably my favourite in the entire game. This is probably my personal favourite level of the entire game, despite its simplicity. I've put Paderborn Village at number 2, mostly because of how immersive it is, and also the game really needed a stealth mission to break up the pacing. Next up we have Chateau Schufstaffel. We're at the hard part of the game now. The chateau itself is really impressive. It's multi-storied with rooms that clearly serve various purposes. There's a bit of freedom in how you tackle the chateau, and elimination of the officers which I really appreciate, mostly thanks to the balcony and rooftop sections. I'm a big fan of how you can break the glass and drop down onto the top floor here. The care in level design and detail is definitely on show. The challenge comes from being forced to tackle high enemy counts in large open spaces, especially when paratroopers are involved, but I think if you've made it this far, it's more than manageable. I've put the Chateau at number 4. This is one of the best looking levels in the entire game, and the gameplay is pretty good from start to finish. Next up is Unhallowed Ground, a memorable but bad level, redeemed by a fun boss fight. Chances are you've internally groaned when loading this level up on a second playthrough. It has great atmosphere with a dark sky, regular lightning strikes, a thick fog, and a creepy soundtrack. What's not to like? Probably the snipers hiding in trees who are barely visible, even if you're lucky enough to find where they are. Be prepared to frequently scout ahead with the snooper rifle's infrared scope, unless you want to be regularly quick-saving. Either way, it's a very tedious level which is almost saved by the semi-boss fight against multiple super soldiers. If only fighting these things was more fun than landing shots from partial cover against their chunky hitboxes. At least it's a better arena than what we saw in Super Soldier. I've put Unhallowed Ground at number 23. The tedious gameplay ruins the fantastic atmosphere and boss fight at the end. Next we have The Dig, a unique setting and layout that Return to Castle Wolfenstein doesn't implement too often. If you like ladders, you might like this level. There's a few of them. I can't think of many other reasons to. The combat in this level is tough more than it is interesting. When you're not trying to keep your distance from proto-soldiers, you'll be clearing out similar looking caverns with a couple of snipers placed in just the right positions to catch you out. A few man-made rooms really could have helped signpost this level and broken up the monotony a little. There are 3 proto-soldiers throughout the level, one of which likes to pre-fire the only place you could possibly peek from with the venom gun. There's very little health and no armor pickups throughout the level, so taking fights slowly and backpedaling is the best way to play it, unfortunately. If I had one criticism of Return to Castle Wolfenstein, it would be that it struggles to increase the difficulty in a way that doesn't slow the gameplay to an absolute crawl. This level exemplifies that. I've put The Dig at number 22. It's high in difficulty and not in the fun way. Finally, Return to Castle Wolfenstein. We've finally made it back to the castle, but now it's filled with paratroopers and elite guards. I'm not sure which level is the toughest out of this and The Dig. Probably whichever one you started off with less health. First, you get to deal with a fight against some undead in a tight space. That's the easy part. The rest of the level consists of some of the toughest fights in the entire game. There are no proto-soldiers or lopers, but the way the paratroopers are positioned is just cruel. Every room or outdoor space you enter is likely to have at least one paratrooper waiting for you, often accompanied by elite guards or standard soldiers. I'm pretty sure it's just placebo, but I find the paratroopers are slightly tougher to take down in this level. Like The Dig, there's very little health on offer, so you can't afford to have too many scratchy combat encounters. I don't mind the layout, with the courtyard offering a central landmark for the player to base their navigation around, and the gloomy clouds matched with the flame torch lighting really capture the mood of a tough penultimate level well. I've put Return to Castle Wolfenstein at number 8 on the list. It does what a penultimate level is supposed to do, be challenging, but it's probably a little bit unfair in places. And last but not least, 21st to be exact, Heinrich. The final boss is disappointing. You load up on ammo, make your way outside to the arena, See Heinrich, who has just turned his loyal servant into yet another undead in the intro cutscene, and prepare to face him. He's a pushover. A really cool looking pushover. Heinrich can charge you with his giant sword, cause the ground to shake, pulling you towards him with it, revive the undead around him, and send spirits towards you that do reasonable amounts of damage. 4 different moves makes him sound quite dynamic, but in practice if you circle strafe, keep your distance, and keep the undead down often enough, it's an easy victory. Heinrich has a lot of health, so you are forced to use a variety of weapons, but it shouldn't be a problem once you've learned how to deal with his attacks. Heinrich deserves to be at number 21 on this list. It's a very boring boss fight, and just too easy for the end of the game. At least it's not frustrating. That brings the list to a close. If you have any comments you'd like to leave telling me which positions I got wrong, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.